the live stream's not working right now, but we're going to set up a recording and it'll be loaded onto the shared site later on, okay? Mourning is the price we pay for having the courage to love others. Even in grief, we know that the wonder of human life is too complex and too magnificent to be memorialized in endless pain. The gifts of spirit our loved ones gave us cannot be measured or weighed, nor can they be lost or even tarnished in time. Even in our darkest hours, we know that some of their light and their warmth will always be with us, bringing comfort and joy, and in the fullness of time, healing and peace. I'd like to offer Psalm 121. I'll do it in English and then in Hebrew. A song for ascents. I turn my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your guardian will not slumber. See the guardian of Israel, neither slumbers nor sleeps. Adonai is your guardian. Adonai is your protection at your right hand. By day the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. Adonai will guard you from harm. God will guard your life. Adonai will guard your coming and going now and forever. Esainai el harim, me'ayin yavo Ezri. Ezri me'em Adonai, ose shamayim, shamayim, ve'aretz. Ayitein lamod raglecha, ayatum shorecha, hine lo yanum v'lo yishan shomer Yisrael. Adonai shomerecha, Adonai tzilchad yad yeminecha, Yomam hashemesh lokeka, vayarei amaleya. Adonai yishmarcha mikol ra, Yishmor et nafshecha. Adonai yishmar tzedkecha uvoecha. Me'ata v'yad olam. Shalom, my name is Rabbi Alan Finkel, and I am honored to lead the service on behalf of the Werier family. As together we honor the passing of Lawrence Werier, the son of Alexander and Ada Werier, nee Broder, Leib ben Elia Mendel Va'eda, who left us this past Wednesday evening, November the 6th, 2024, at home, and peacefully in a sleep. On the Hebrew calendar, we will mark Lawrence's passing on the 6th day of Cheshvan, the second month of the new year. In the year 5785, late into his 98th year. Alzheimer's and dementia may have been his companions in his last 4 years, but so was the love that surrounded him with family visits and simple closeness in those last years, months, weeks, and days, until his last moment when he passed away with Eddie at his side. Lawrence was predeceased by his parents, Alex and Ada, who met here and raised their family here in Winnipeg. He was the middle of 3 children. His sister Mona Liebling, who was 3 years older than him, who is no longer with us, and his sister Sandra Rice, 7 years younger, and her husband Arnold, who survives her older brother. He leaves behind the love of his life, Eddie, or Etty, née Rubenfeld, who he married in 1949, a marriage reaching an astonishing milestone of 75 years that would have reached 76 in January. And he is survived by the other loves of his life, his 3 children, his son Carrie, Shale, and Suzanne, who reside in London, England, his son Clifford Werier and his wife Sabrina Reed from Calgary, and his daughter, his youngest, Jody Werier, and her husband Michael Schuster, who call Vancouver home. And he was blessed to have had 3 grandchildren come into his life, Cynthia and her partner Matt Kennedy, and Alex, and as well his grandson Kobe, who tragically passed away 4 years ago. And around us here today, here and online, there are so many others, friends and family, and in the so many communities that he was part of, and those whom he met on his travels near and far, or in his world of tennis, who are also mourning his passing. And there's Tess, who was Lawrence's care companion for the last 4 years, who the family introduced to me as having become part of her family, of their family, who went out with him regularly on dim sum and sushi, and who invited Lawrence to become part of her family and her life as well. I am grateful to Lawrence's family, Eddie, Carrie, Cliff, and Jody, for the time we got to spend with each other in preparation for this day. To tell and share stories about Lawrence, not just about his last days and months, but also about his whole life. As each of his children spoke, it was remarkable to see that so many of the stories that one would tell were completely new to the others, and not just for me. For all of us to see that each of them had a unique relationship with their dad, and unique teachings from their own life with Lawrence that they could share not only with each other, but to offer to the world as well, starting here today in this moment of eulogy, but also in the days and years ahead. So with the family's permission, I will start telling Lawrence's story and then ask Carrie to offer his words on behalf of the siblings, and then I will offer some concluding remarks. Lawrence was born in 1925 here in Winnipeg, the middle of 3 children, 1 sister older and 1 younger. His father Alex was born in Russia, and his mother Ada was born in Scotland, Glasgow, and grew up in Montreal, and these would be his major life influences. Lawrence's kids all described their dad as larger than life, and that he was very much like their grandfather Alex, who was huger than life and had no filters, while their dad, by way of comparison, was dialed back just a bit, just larger than life, and having at least a couple filters. In school, he was incorrigible. He was that student who raised his hand to ask clever questions of his teachers, often based on word plays, for the singular purpose of annoying his teachers. He grew up in the North End on familiar streets, Flora, Burroughs, Church, and O'Meara, and he attended familiar schools, Champlain, McRae, and Parrott Schule for 1 year, and then graduating from St. John's High School. Lawrence found other early outlets for his creativity. He trained as a gymnast. He acted with the Winnipeg's Little Theatre, and he was a founding member of the Triple E's Club at the YMHA. But for all that external energy, Lawrence was also bright, going on to take pre-med courses at university. But then again, he was also passionate about being Jewish, dropping out of pre-med to enlist in the Canadian Army with 3 of his friends to fight against the Nazis, a decision that made his parents both proud and disappointed. It was on his return to Winnipeg that his life trajectory would change. He came back into the family businesses where he would create and recreate and invent and reimagine the businesses that his father and his grandfather had established through Golden and Company and J. Werier and Company. And on a summer day at Winnipeg Beach in 1946, Lawrence's life turned once again as he impishly tugged the pigtail of a pretty girl that he saw. And that is how he met Eddie Rubenfeld. He was 20 and she was 17 and a half. And when I asked Eddie about her first impressions of Lawrence, she told me that she looked around at him and she knew she had met the love of her life. And when I asked about why Lawrence had chosen Eddie, the kids all laughed. And as Jody said, oh, Dad always went after the lookers, and Mom was definitely a looker. And so they started to date. And there's a story of the first visit to her home. He was quite secular, and Eddie had grown up in a quite orthodox, quite traditional Polish Jewish home. As Jody describes it, Lawrence walked into the house for dinner quite close to Yom Kippur and saw Eddie looking kaporos, which for those who don't means she was literally swinging a live chicken around her head to get rid of her sins. Lawrence had two competing thoughts. What am I doing here? Run away fast. But then there was a second thought. Oh my, she's so pretty. And so he stayed. Soon enough, they wanted to marry, but there was a problem in Eddie's traditional home. She had an older sister, Sherry, who had to be married off first. And so Lawrence started bugging Sherry's boyfriend, Ben Chachanov, to marry Sherry so that he and Eddie could get married. And so it was that Sherry got married in September 1948, and Lawrence and Eddie 4 months later in January 1949. Eddie then had several pregnancy losses and had been told that she would never have kids. But then they were blessed with a miracle baby, Carrie, who was born in 1952, and then two more miracle babies followed, each 2 years apart, Cliff and Jody. At this point, as we move into the current stage of that life, I'm going to ask Kerry to come up and offer his remarks. Kerry? Come over here. Yeah.
Lawrence Werier wasn't a big man physically, but his personality was huge. From childhood in the North End to parenthood in the South End, he was always a proud Winnipegger. He was a creative businessman, a sharp dresser, a veteran sun worshiper, and an unstoppable joke teller. Lawrence was a people person who had one never-ending mission: to meet and greet every human being on the planet. In all his pursuits, from designing souvenir spoons and knockoff Cabbage Patch dolls, to painting pictures full of color, to playing thousands of sets of hard-fought tennis, he was more energetic than a battery-powered bunny. Our father's most outstanding characteristic, though, was one which he shared with my mother, which was his generosity. Our parents were never stingy in providing sorry. Our parents were never stingy with providing their kids with love and support on every level. Since the family lived in Manitoba, Alberta, British Columbia, and England, our frequent get-togethers in the winter warmth of Costa Rica, St. Lucia, and Mexico, paid for by our generous parents, became the glue that held us together. But even before those family holidays, there was never any doubt that Lawrence and Eddie offered warm, unconditional love for myself, Jody, and Cliff, and our three dogs, Piddles, Weasel, and of course, the king of Park Place West, our canine brother, Tiger. When the time came, Mom and Dad opened their arms to our life partners, Suzanne, Michael, and Sabrina, followed by their grandchildren Cynthia, Kobe, and Alex. In his later years, Dad shared lots of laughs with Rick, first as a business associate and very soon as a close friend. His final few years were made lighter by the beautiful Tess, who, like Rick, has become an honorary member of the Werier Mishpucha. And of course, our family is also eternally grateful to all of the kind people who served as Lawrence's caregivers in his last few difficult years. Lawrence loved life. He loved to travel, swim, and scuba dive. He loved to play bridge, poker, and board games, to eat bacon and drink scotch, to kibitz, to get a reaction from people, to break barriers, to invent new words and phrases like kricher, which sounds Yiddish, but I'm pretty sure Dad made it up. Imagine it's the summer of 1962 and you're zooming down the Trans-Canada Highway in your new Chevrolet Corvair with your wife in front and your 3 bored kids in the back. You're traveling past endless wheat fields, the sun is beating down, the kids are whining, and you desperately need to liven things up. You see a Dodge Dart half a mile in front of you doing a sensible 60 to your 75. As you pull out to pass it, you instruct the kids to scream at the top of their lungs as you zoom alongside the hapless schmucks in the Dodge. Cricker! The stunned looks on their faces made us laugh for the rest of the afternoon. Dad was always ready for action, anytime, any place. He signed up for the army when he was underage to kill the bastards who were murdering the Jews, he said, and was bitterly disappointed that the war was over before he could get there. He spotted a gap in the post-war market and briefly became the bubblegum king of Winnipeg. When the bubble burst, Lawrence joined and eventually took over his father's tobacco wholesale business, Golden & Company. He remade it to specialize in toys. Cliff and I always had the latest rocket ships and cowboy outfits, while Jody had the first Chatty Cathy doll to hit Winnipeg. The company also sold jokes and novelties, many of which Dad also designed. In order to place orders for these specialty items, he traveled annually to what was then called the Orient. Dad had a huge number of close friends and colleagues there, from Hong Kong to Korea, from Japan to Taiwan. Golden & Company was Dad's unique creation. He was quite rightly proud of his achievements, and as he went from being the boss's son who took over the company and evolved into an employer who was much more than a boss. Sometimes, like all great strivers, Dad failed. But his talents included picking himself up, dusting himself off, and starting all over again. More importantly, they included making and keeping friendships. He had a huge number of loyal buddies who stood up for him when the going got rough. But perhaps Dad's most important achievement wasn't a singular effort. It was his strong and loving marriage to Eddie. The success of their globe-trotting partnership gave his kids the confidence to go out into the world, to find strong, loving partners, and to create lasting marriages of their own. After years of playing singles tennis, Dad eventually tempted Mom to join him, and she proved to be a natural player. With Dad's vicious serves and Mom's clever returns, they were a dynamic duo on the court and off. Lawrence had such fun being alive. To him, the best kind of fun was dangerous fun. If there was a vertiginous ski lift chugging up a steep mountain, he'd take it. If there was a ship burning in a foreign harbor, he'd investigate it. If there was a rentable motorcycle and a mountain ride to ride it along, he'd hop on it. If there was a lung-threatening bird flu epidemic, he'd fly into it. And if there was a joint of super strong marijuana, he'd inhale it, but let's not go there. Decades ago, at the last minute, I joined Mom and Dad on a motoring holiday to the south of France. We ended up in Monte Carlo. One morning after breakfast, the three of us were walking down a street full of shockingly expensive jewelry shops and chic-looking locals walking equally chic-looking dogs. Dad suddenly began singing and dancing, very badly, down those posh streets. Mom and I were, as usual, embarrassed, but also strangely proud. Mom looked at me, shrugged her shoulders, and smiled. Well, she said, "It's never boring." Lawrence Broder Werier, 1925 to 2024. Game, set, and match to Lawrence.
Carrie? I think you need it more than I do. Thanks. Lawrence always loved telling stories, and there will always be so many stories that will be told about Lawrence himself. As I visited with the family, someone would offer up a single word, and a world of stories would flood out, some funny, and many so insightful. Hairpiece, one would mention. And there would be gales of laughter, and Carrie started talking about his own male pattern baldness, that it was a gift from his dad, apparently, who first experienced it in his mid-20s. Sorry, this microphone just got in the way here. And then the kids recalled how Lawrence returned one day from his twice annual buying trips to the Orient, each of which was 4 to 6 weeks in length. But this time he was wearing a headpiece. Cliff and Carrie looked at the hairpiece when he walked in the door and were literally rolling on the ground laughing for what it seemed like days on end, while Jody was horrified, thinking it was the most ridiculous thing she'd ever seen. But Lawrence just took it in stride, and every year thereafter there was another hairpiece, not a toupee, but a hairpiece, coming home from one of Dad's trips to the Orient. Different styles, different colors, and finally and reluctantly, Lawrence's hairpieces would also include some gray in them. And this continued until his mid-80s, when a friend of his said, "You know, Lawrence, it's okay to just shave your head and get your ear pierced and wear a horking big diamond." And that's what he did. He shaved his head, he pierced his ear, and wore a diamond stud with pride until his final days. This independence and assertiveness and his disinclination to conform would serve him well in so many other parts of his life, because they also spoke to his other strengths, like being creative and resilient. His many business ventures had a lot of ups and downs, too trusting of business partners at times, but always finding a way to bounce back. He was incredibly creative, not only in sourcing toys, but in inventing them as well. And as I already heard the story about Jody and her first chatty Cathy in Winnipeg. And Lawrence would appear on CBC Spotlight around Christmas time as their toy expert to talk about the toy of the year. And there was that period when he became the bubblegum king. He worked a lot, and he was away a lot. But then again, he was a father carrying out the roles of his era, where Eddie never worked outside of the home, but most certainly worked hard inside the home, with 3 children to raise and him away on those long buying trips. And Lawrence knew that his commitment was to provide, and when things didn't work out, to work triply hard to provide. And in all those things, and in all those times, he was seen by his friends as a good man and as an honest man. There's a story of a business failure later in his business career, where 15 of his friends got together and each co-signed loans for $15,000 each to get him going again. And he made sure that every one of them got paid back, and he continued to provide. For all his external creative energy, it was not limited to work. Unbeknownst to most, Lawrence took up painting in his later years. And his artwork is actually quite astonishing. Check out his Facebook page, it's there. And it shows a love of color and intensity and balance. And his art showed an incredibly discerning eye for nature, for animals, and surprisingly for portraiture, the hardest form, the most difficult form. What I found so captivating was how Lawrence painted a subject's eyes, suggesting that extra layer inside him of how he really saw the people around him in his life. In terms of his Judaism, Lawrence tended to describe himself as secular, but readily accepted Eddie's more traditional views, and acceding to her wishes that her children attend Hebrew school at Herzliya, the high holidays, and to have b'nai mitzvahs there, certainly the boys. Well, but in talking to the kids, their formal Jewish engagements were not the most fun experience because they were now living in the 60s and they all preferred what the 60s had to offer them. But still, Lawrence and Eddie ensured that each of their kids got a sense of their Judaism, whether today they'd like to admit it or not. Lawrence and Edie also understood the importance of being part of the Jewish community, with the two of them setting up an endowment fund in their names at the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba to contribute to the future of the Winnipeg Jewish community that had given them so much. And as for his kids, Lawrence was proud of his kids and their successes and what they achieved, and incredibly warm and loving towards their life partners, as Carrie has already alluded to. I asked each of the children about the one lesson that Lawrence taught each of them that they carry with them to this day. They were quite surprised by the question, but the answers were thoughtful and quite remarkable. For Carrie, the actor living in England, and who only gets paid when he works, he was asked by Suzanne when they were first dating, what if the money dries up? What if the phone doesn't ring? And Carrie realized that his answer came from what he saw in his dad and his many business adventures. He replied, I don't have a backup plan. I hustle a lot. And Carrie was, in that moment, intensely grateful for this gift from his dad. For Cliff, he said his dad styled himself as someone who brought people together. Lawrence had shared stories with his kids about people in his own broader family who wouldn't talk to each other or to him. And he took these stories to heart. His older sister Mona moved to LA, and he made a point to visit her every single year. And he always had a special tie to Sandra that goes back to their teen years. In the Army, Lawrence learned just about every filthy song there was. And because Lawrence was Lawrence, on his return to Winnipeg, he immediately taught every one of them to his 13-year-old sister. The funny thing is that in the past few years, even as Alzheimer's crept into the picture, Sandra still remembered the songs and would sing those dirty limericks back to Lawrence. Cliff then noted how his dad extended the importance of bringing family together, people together, to the generations that followed. He made it a point to sponsor trips at Christmas to faraway places, to bring everyone together, his children, their partners, and their grandchildren, because now everybody was spread around the world. It was incredibly important for him to have love and sense of family to be experienced intergenerationally, most certainly drawing his 3 grandchildren, Cynthia, Kobe, and Alex, into his web. They truly loved him, and he them in return. And then Jody offered her lessons. She joked about how her dad taught her to be irreverent and a nonconformist almost to a fault in high school, but which is taken away from her father as she moved into adulthood is the importance of being a nonconformist, not all the time, but in choosing the right spots to do so, especially for her and her love of travel and adventure, and in how she views the world around her and her place in it, and how to balance her love of the law and its expectations of her as a lawyer and later as a judge, with her also being able to be herself. And Jody talks about her dad's love of fitness, most especially his lifelong attachment to tennis that lasted until he was almost 90, and how his commitment to fitness has inspired her as well. All in all, I think Lawrence offers us not only just great stories and memories, but perhaps things, life lessons, for each of us to consider within our own lives. I would like to leave you with these final words. From the words I heard about Lawrence, he lived his life large. He understood the power of connection and personality. He loved those close to him. He lived with a joy that allowed him to cherish every day, on the good days and the bad. And he most certainly made a mark on the world around him, living an ethical and good life. We are all the better for having experienced the energy and the love that he carried with him every day of his life. And as I conclude these remarks, it is with our traditional blessing, our wish, and our hope May his name, Lawrence Werier, the son of Alex and Ada Werier, Leib ben Elia Mendel ve'Ada, always be for a good memory. Can you hear it, son? May it be God's will. We will be concluding this part of the service shortly with the Al Malei Rachamim, both in Hebrew and in English, and then concluding our funeral service here at graveside. Immediately following, the family would like to invite you all to join them for a meal of consolation, which will take place at the Shaftesbury on the main floor. The address is 905 Shaftesbury. And the family also will invite you to visit them for Shiva, which will be held 4 days, today through Wednesday, from 2 to 4 p.m. at the Shaftesbury in their apartment, which is unit 3018. Again, 2 to 4 p.m. at that same address. And finally, as you may know, Jewish tradition encourages those who are living to honor the memories of those who passed by making a donation in their name. We don't do flowers. If you're considering doing so, please, the family encourages you to donate to the endowment fund that Lawrence and Eddie set up in their names at the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba, or of course to a charity of your own choice that is dear to you. I'd like to move now to the Al Malei Rachamim. I'll do the Hebrew first and follow it with the English. El Malei Rachamim Shochein Bamromim Hametzei Menucha Nechona Tacha Kanfei Ashkina Im Kedoshim Utuhorim Bizahar Arakaya Mazhirin Et Nishmat Lev Ben Elia Mendel Beira Shalach Laholamo Baal Harachamim Yastirehu Beseter Bechonafav Lolamim Mitzror Chaim Et Nishmato Adonai Hu Nachalato V'yanuach b'shalom al kol mishkavo v'nomar Amen. May the source of life, the fountain of all being, open our hearts to compassion and our eyes to wisdom, that we might glimpse in perfect peace and sadness the way of all things. May Lawrence Werier's memory be for us a blessing. And may we never let the light of his love grow dim in our hearts. May we remember all his worthy and righteous deeds, that his memory be forever bound up in the bond of life. God is our source and our destination, our beginning and our end. May Lawrence's death awaken us to this truth, that the bond of love we shared and share not be severed in sorrow. May he rest in peace. And together let us say, Amen. Moving now to the Mourner's Kaddish. Oddly enough, it's a prayer that at face value does not appear to speak at all about death, but it actually is filled with images drawn from other places. The words they chose point to other places in the Torah and in the Tanakh that actually is all about death. The first two words, Yit Gadal Pikadash, actually elicit the story of the world to come, where it's all imagined that we will all rise from our graves and see our loved ones again. So with that in mind, I'm going to recite the Mourner's Kaddish. It's actually written in Hebrew and Aramaic, so it's going to be a hard language for me to understand, never mind you all. But there's a tradition that the rabbis tell us that if you say the word Amen, it's as if you said the whole prayer. So what I'm going to do when you reach the word Amen is I'm going to simply raise my arm so you'll know when to join us with that word as well. And that way, we're incorporating the whole experience. Traditional Judaism says that it's only the mourners that do so. I encourage anybody to do so, because if you take a look around, it's not just we're not doing this only for Lawrence, but for everybody who no longer has family to say the Mourner's Kaddish for them. May the love and eternal connection of our souls give us strength As we turn to recite the words hallowed by time, sanctifying the name of God, we honor the memory of Lawrence Werier with the words of Kaddish Yatom, the mourner's Kaddish. And together, Yitgadal, Yitgadash, Shemei Rabah, V'yalma divrach hirutei, v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon u'v'yamechon, u'v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, v'agala u'v'zman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabah Mevorach, La'alam U'lalmei Almaya, Yitbarach V'ishtabach, V'yitpa'ar, V'yitramam V'yitnaseh, V'yitadar, V'yitaleh, V'yitalal, Shmei Dekudesha, Brichu, Le'ela Min Kol Virchata V'shirata, Tushbechata V'nechemata, Damiran V'yalma, V'imru. Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabah Min Shemaya, B'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. V'aseh shalom b'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. And the last two blessings, may there be abundant peace from heaven and life for us in Israel, to which we say, Amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us and to all Israel, to which we say, Amen. We move now to the final act of filling in the grave. On the Kamo Yavo B'Shalom, may Lawrence Werier come to his eternal home in peace. In Jewish tradition, to shovel dirt into the grave is a mitzvah. It is a righteous act which we do without any hope of reward. With this act, we take on the responsibility of caring for our loved ones until the very end. Our loved ones deserve to be buried by kind hands, knowing hands, sorrowful hands. You are invited to participate in this mitzvah. It is a painful act, however, one born of love and compassion for those who have meant so much to us. Adonai Natan v'Adonai Lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai Mevorach. With Job we have said, God you have given, God you have taken away, blessed be the name of God. May the memory of Lawrence Werier be a blessing, as we mark that his essence will never leave our hearts and souls. In a moment, I'm going to invite the family to start the process of filling. But I just wanted to give you some framing for this custom. There are 3 shovels there. Please use them all. There are so many personal customs and customs of the place. Some people use 1 shovel, some use 3, some use the front of the shovel, some the back. There's many different personal reasons for that. And I'll ask you to choose the custom that matters to you. And by the way, if you don't want to use the shovel, feel free to just take a handful of earth and throw it in as well. But there's one thing I will ask you to do, and this is kind of my thing, is that when you finish shoveling, put the shovel back in the earth rather than giving it to another person. If you pass a shovel to me, I'm taking it on as an obligation. If I pick up the shovel, I'm taking the shovel as an act of love. Okay, so that's the one thing I'll ask you to do. So take this on as a loving, final, personal act for each of you to hold your memories closer and help Lawrence move from this physical plane onto the spiritual lane that he'll continue on right now. I'll ask you to start. Carrie, feel free to come around.